KI4DCR. We're running the special PCRN VHF 2-meter net with Greg Fishel. And I'm going to skip all the regular net jargon that we do because we are live on the Facebook Messenger, and you should be able to see them through my MacBook. We're just using FaceTime because it was a lot easier. Zoom cut us off the last time we did that. We had said they had 40 minutes, but they gave us 26 and they cut us off. So we're trying something different this time. So I'm just going to go through and take check-ins, and then I'll go back through and get questions. So we'll do it that way. So we're going to start with stations A through N and go from there. All right. Well, I've got Greg pulled up here on the FaceTime, and I'm going to let him kind of introduce himself and give a little background on his experience in the business. And then we'll open it up here in a few minutes for questions.
Okay. Well, it's good to be here again. We've done this once before, and it's always fun. I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, although some would argue I haven't grown up yet. And then I sort of meandered my way down south, got my degree in meteorology from Penn State, and got my first TV job in Salisbury, Maryland. And then about a year later, found out about a job opening at WRAL in Raleigh, and came here in June of '81 and stayed until February of 2019. And we were just talking before the show started here that, TV is many times a transient business, that people don't stick around at any one station for more than 2 or 3 years. But WRAL has a long track record of keeping people a long time. And I was just one of those lucky people that had a chance to work with them for over 37 years. So now I have a weather subscription service on something called Patreon. And for the cost of a cup of coffee a month, you can get a lot more detail because I don't have any time constraints. Nobody's wrapping me up after 3 minutes. So if that's something that, if you're a weather nut and you like additional information, then I'd be thrilled if you would check that out. Just give it a shot.
And I will be the first to say that I got in on Greg's Patreon right away after Martin told me about it. And I have been a loyal subscriber to that since day one, and I really enjoy it. I look forward every night to it, and I pretty much go by what he says. And so far, he's definitely had the accuracy factor going, and it's been great. The only thing, Greg, I wish you would do is do a beach forecast for us.
Well, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, that would be great because I'm every other week I'm semi-retired, so I'm down at North Topsail.
Okay.
Because the weather down there, I listened to a couple of people with Spectrum for weather down there because they seem to cover that area. But I'm going to see if anybody has got a question, and we'll just go at the top and start with Bob N4GEB. Do you have a question for Greg?
No, other than the big obvious one, with the storm coming. Be interesting to get his insights on that. But I sure appreciate, Greg, that you have taken some time out to spend time with us. Back to net control at 4GEB.
All right, and he and I discussed the storm a little bit, but I'm going to let him go ahead and do that because that's what everybody is thinking about tonight. I mean, the Facebook it's even taken over the political discussions for the last couple of days, which is fine by me. But and I will say I've seen a lot of consensus with a lot of the different meteorologists and the Facebook meteorologists, I call them that aren't quite out of college yet, but they're close, and they have like North Carolina weather, Ethan, and some of the other guys. So let's talk about the storm, what you think it might do, where it might go, what our rain forecast is, and so forth.
Well, the one bit of good news, if there is any good news about this, is that the system, having moved over land now for a couple of days, has been disrupted quite a bit with regard to wind. The strongest winds are now well removed from the center. They're well off in the north and east, so the storm doesn't have any inner core at all the way it did when it made landfall in the Big Bend area of Florida. So, yes, it's going to get back out over water for a little bit of time, but it doesn't look like it's going to get far enough east to realize the benefits, quote unquote, of the Gulf Stream. And one of the things that we've learned over the last couple of decades is the importance of something called ocean heat content. And that's basically a fancy phrase for how deep the warm water is. If the warm water at the surface is shallow, then think of a tropical system as being a big spoon that's stirring that water up. And if water's only warm at the very surface and there's cooler water underneath, and it mixes that cooler water up at the top, and all of a sudden the system has nothing to work with, or very little. And so the Gulf Stream has that type of warm water depth to it, but it just doesn't look like the system is going to get far enough east to realize the benefit, and I use the word loosely, of that. So that's good news. I would say the worst case scenario would be a landfall as a strong tropical storm, which probably wouldn't be as bad as Ian when it came in a couple of years ago as a Cat 1. But the thing about the rainfall potential, and this is the stat that the local National Weather Service office in Raleigh passed along this afternoon that I had never heard before, but I think this really drives home the point, is that the folks up at the Weather Prediction Center up in Washington, D.C., who are precipitation specialists, that's all they do, is look at precipitation potential and hazards related to that over the whole country. And they have us in a high risk on Thursday, and they only issue high risks on 4% of the days during the entire year, and 40% of the flood-related fatalities in the United States occur on days with a high risk. So if that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what would. And so, the potential for, pretty staggering amounts of rain is definitely there across, a good part of central North Carolina. And not just flash flooding, but river flooding could be an issue as well. And we were also talking about the fact that, because the water drains downstream, it's worse if you get heavy rain upstream, because that water is then going to come down and add to the water that you've got over you. And it looks like the rainfall is going to be pretty heavy up to the north of us once the storm goes by. So the combination of all these factors make it somewhat scary of a scenario here as we head toward, later tomorrow, Thursday, and into Friday.
All good points, and I have a couple people here. Greg Randall says, we miss you so much on WRL, and he can get the Patreon, and it's better than all that, because you don't have to wait for the commercials and go through all that to get the full story.
Well, the other thing that's really great is that I don't have anybody standing next to the camera after 3 minutes telling me to shut up.
Exactly. You get the raw, unedited version, which is awesome. And another guy, Marty Webb, he says, pass along a hello from one broadcaster to another. He's W4MLW and Rockfish. And I met Greg at TK Trips having a beer back in 1983. I had just started at WKNC Radio, majoring in communications at NC State. And I believe you had been at WRL for a little while, but not very long.
A couple of years.
Yeah, at that point in time. And have watched them ever since. So and I really enjoy the Patreon. And I want to say that on the 146.88 group, Martin has posted the link in order to sign up for that and get involved with it. And it's very simple. And I mean, you won't even miss the $3. To me, that's like change in my pocket. I don't even know I've spent it. So let me go down to Will N4GTI and see if he has a question. I'm betting he does.
Well, hey, Charles, and everybody on the net. Greg, it's great to have you on again. You started, I had my question all laid out like a good student, but you started to answer it, and that was about the surface temperature of the ocean. What is the mechanism that the water, transfers that energy up into the hurricane? And also, I think I'm correct that we're seeing warmer sea surface temperatures, and that can affect the intensity of the storms. Right. So just some more about what those actual numbers are, sea surface temperatures, and what makes the difference, and the trend in rising sea temperatures.
Yes, there definitely are. There's a large area of above normal sea surface temperatures, and I always try to be as objective and fair as I can about this. That some of that is probably due to the overall warming of the climate, but there is also natural variability in our atmosphere and in our oceans, and sometimes you can have anomalously warm readings that would have happened anyways. About the only thing you could say that the climate change augments that, obviously a little bit, but there can still be cycles that go, up and down, and we're, clearly in a warm cycle right now. But there's a couple of mechanisms that the water helps with. There's something called a sensible heat flux, which is a direct flux of heat from the ocean water to the air above it. And then thunderstorms, as you probably know, thrive on warmth and moisture. And there's no more warm and moist environment than a nice big ocean with water temperatures up around 84 Fahrenheit. So that gives you a great breeding ground for thunderstorms. And those thunderstorms, as they grow, release heat into the atmosphere, which then makes the storm even stronger than it would have been without that. And it's sort of a feedback type thing where all these mechanisms keep feeding on themselves and end up making the storm stronger than it would have been without that. Now, there are limiting factors, like if you have wind shear, where the wind increases as you go up in the atmosphere. That's almost like you leaving your chimney flue open and you've got a fire going in the wintertime and you want it to keep you warm, but the flue's open, and so the wind blows across the top of your chimney and sucks that heat right out. And so that can be a limiting factor. And then, of course, as we mentioned, the sea surface temperatures. Usually anything above 27 Celsius, which is about 80 Fahrenheit, is a minimal requirement for a tropical system to get going. And in the Gulf Stream right now, it's about 29 or 30 degrees Celsius. So if it were to get out over that, then that could be a problem. Right now, there just aren't any indications that's going to happen, thankfully.
Excellent question and excellent response from Greg on that one. Any comments, Will?
No, thank you very much, Greg. And I did have another question, but I'm going to let you go on down the list. Perhaps someone else is they've got that jotted down. N4GTI.
All right, next we'll pick up, I wanted to mention a couple of people that have checked in real quick. KW4BT Herb out in Middlesex, and K4DKX Joel in Cherryville. So let's go back up, pick up the next station in Garner. Craig, KQ4GON. Do you have a question for Greg?
Good evening, Charles and Nat. It's Craig in Garner, KQ4GON. The only question I can think of is peak viewing for Perseids meteor showers Saturday night and Sunday night. Is this going to suck all the cloud cover out before then, or is it just going to blanket us out so we don't see anything?
No, we actually should be in pretty good shape this weekend. In fact, Saturday may be a completely dry day. I'm just sort of playing my cards safe right now and mentioning that there may be a leftover shower or thunderstorm somewhere Saturday afternoon or evening, but it's very possible that Saturday will end up being a dry day and no worse than partly sunny. And then skies should be, for the most part, clear as we head towards Saturday night and Sunday night. So unless there's, what am I looking for? Unless there's like a random cloud that just happens to be in the wrong part of the sky at the wrong time, I think the chances are pretty good that we're going to be done with this by that time. So that's good news. It's funny. You just made me think about the fact that when I first got into the business, I had a good friend that worked for then Carolina Power and Light, and he was a meteorologist. And people asked him, "Well, what do you do as a meteorologist for CP&L? Do you read meters?" And he said, "No, actually look at the weather." And there are also people that think that we're experts in space, and we're really not. The word meteor is a Greek word for atmosphere. And so that's where the root of the word meteorology comes from, is the study of the atmosphere. So we don't know nearly as much about space as people give us credit for.
Good response. Craig, does that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up comments?
Well, sounds like good kayaking on the lake Saturday night with a clear view, I hope. Thank you very much. KQ4GON, back to net.
Great question. All right, we'll move down to Joe in Wake Forest, W4TTO. Good evening, Joe. I hope you're feeling good. And do you have a question for Greg?
KI4DCR, W4TTO. Good evening, everyone. Greg, good to see and hear you. And Charles, thanks for pulling this together. Very informative and interesting. I guess my question would be, when watching forecasts of whether it's a tropical storm or a hurricane, they're always comparing what they call the American model against the European model.
Yes.
And my question is, what is the difference between the two? And is either one more accurate than the other, or is it just a crapshoot? Because I do know tropical storms and hurricanes are almost difficult to track because they could change direction at any moment. So,
right.
Your take on the American model and the European model?
Sure. The European model used to have a clear advantage over the American model, and the explanation that I have always heard from people that are experts in modeling is that their system. Well, first of all, they had more powerful computers, believe it or not, than we did. But they were able to constantly assimilate new observations into the model cycles, and in a sense do constant self-corrections. Like if the model solution started to drift off from reality a little bit, then this influx of new observations would bring it back. And they did a much better job on that than we did for a long time. But now there are instances, especially with tropical systems, where the American model has outperformed the European. It's not every time by any stretch, but it's not the laughing stock, that it used to be years ago. So we've made a lot of progress in that arena. And then, if I could, I just wanted to mention something about the ensemble approach, which is relatively new in our science, but if you just have a single model, we call that a deterministic model. And if that's all you look at, you're putting all your eggs in that one basket. And we don't have enough observations to observe the atmosphere perfectly. So there's always inherent error in any model analysis, and those errors can sometimes multiply and become fairly large the farther you go out in time. So the ensemble approach is to change the initial conditions by a very small amount, maybe to 30 different extents, or in the case of the European system, 50 different extents. And then you see how much of an impact those small changes at the beginning have 4 or 5 days out. And if the range of solutions is huge, then you have very low confidence in your forecast. Whereas if they're all very similar, then you have high confidence in the forecast. And so this is the first time in human history that we have had a way to quantify the amount of uncertainty in a forecast. And I worry about how that's interpreted by the public, because I can see people saying, well, you never used to talk about uncertainty before, so you've taken a step backwards. Well, the truth is we didn't know what we didn't know back then. And now we have a much better idea as to the complexities of a given forecast. And I think, to be honest with you, correct me if I'm wrong, I think people appreciate the honesty, that they don't want me or anybody to pretend to be confident when I'm not. And so this is a way to, give people a better idea that, yeah, I'm going for a sunny day Saturday and I feel really good about that. Or I'm going for sunny Saturday, but there's a lot that could go wrong. And hurricanes, you can apply that same logic to that.
All right, Joe, follow-up comments or questions?
That was a terrific response. Appreciate the information. W4TTO. Thanks, Charles and Greg.
Take care.
Thanks. And I just want to remind the people watching by Facebook Live that they can ask a question if they need to, and I will read it and get Greg to answer it. So we've had a lot of people 7 or 8, maybe 9 have checked in remotely from different locations, whether they're eating dinner or whatnot. But if you have a question, shoot it to me in the chat box on the blue screen here, and I'll ask it. So now we're going to go to Randy, KE4PNT, Southwest Raleigh. Good evening, Randy. Do you have a question for Greg?
Hi, Charles. Hello, Greg.
Hi.
I've watched WRL since before Bob DeBartolome.
Yeah.
Probably
Wow.
pronounced that wrong. And Charle Gaddy were on. Those were the days.
Absolutely.
And I always appreciate how you explain things, the reasons for things, when you did the forecast on WRL. And that's my question tonight, is the reason for something. Why is it that the north and east side of a hurricane has the worst potential wind damage?
Okay.
I don't understand why that is. Probably a very simple answer. KE4PNT.
All right, Greg, go ahead. Pick it up.
No, that's a great question. And I just wanted to bring up something that I sometimes hear people do, and this technically is not correct, where they will hear something along the lines that the maximum sustained winds are 100 miles an hour, and they will say, yeah, but the storm's moving at 20, so you add the 20 to the 100 and you get 120. That's not right, because the observed winds are the observed winds. You can't increase those. But if you think of it this way, is that what if a hurricane itself was generating 100-mile-an-hour winds on all sides, and then that storm is embedded in a 20-mile-an-hour wind flow or steering current? Then on the side of the hurricane, say it's moving north, because of the counterclockwise circulation around the thing, then you do add the wind that the hurricane is generating to the wind that it's embedded in, and then you will get that 120 on the right-hand side of it, whereas on the left-hand side, the movement is the opposite of the wind direction being generated by the hurricane, so it actually makes the wind weaker on that side, all other things being equal. So I hope that makes sense, but basically what you're doing is saying, okay, this is how much wind the storm is generating, and then on what side of the storm are the wind directions in concert with the flow that it's embedded in. And usually that's on the right-hand side of a hurricane that's moving north. And so that's why you'll end up getting the strongest winds on that side. Now, there can be complicating factors, like supposing you have a big high pressure area over Tennessee. That's going to increase the pressure gradient between the hurricane and the middle of Tennessee. And so in that case, you might actually end up getting stronger winds on the west side, So there are all sorts of variations on a theme here, but just in general, if the hurricane is generating the same amount of wind on all sides, then the side that wind direction is in the same direction as the steering current, that's where you'll get the strongest winds.
All right, Randy, any thoughts or comments?
Okay, I know this is completely different. I thought of an airplane being pushed by the wind versus an airplane flying into the wind. As an analogy, that makes sense. I never understood why that was, but it's the general direction of the hurricane. So that's the reason behind it. Appreciate it. Have a good evening.
Yeah, you too.
TNT.
And that really is true. If you take a look at flight schedules, especially in the wintertime, it's a lot faster going from the U.S. to Europe in January when you're going west to east, than it is coming back from Europe because of the prevailing westerlies.
All right, some good information is being passed and some great questions. A lot of the questions are duplicates of the ones that I was going to ask as well. So let's go to to John N4YFU inside the Beltline. I know John's a very scientific guy. He's probably got a question for Greg.
Good evening, Charles and Greg. This is John N4YFU. Well, I've always been interested in Hurricane Hazel in 1954, and I think I just vaguely remember it, but I believe it came in just north of Myrtle Beach, and it came directly through Raleigh, and then into Virginia with hurricane force winds, and at the summer 1954 was incredibly hot, and there were actually snow flurries reported at RDU around October the 31st. I think I've read that before, but do you think that Hurricane Hazel was the most powerful hurricane to go through North Carolina in historical times?
Yeah, I mean, it was a Category 4 when it made landfall, and it was moving so quickly, excuse me, that it maintained a lot of that strength as it, rocketed up toward the north and west. In fact, if I'm remembering correctly, I think Buffalo and Niagara Falls had at least hurricane force wind gusts with Hazel when it got up there. The problem back then is that you didn't have satellites. And so a lot of the information that people got were from ships that were out at sea and so forth. And, the big storm in Galveston, Texas back in 1900, nobody knew that was coming. Luckily we have a way to monitor the entire globe now, that we didn't have back in those days. But as far as I know, that is the strongest one that's ever hit our coast. I think you're exactly right.
And I can remember my grandparents talking about that storm, about chickens that were sitting in coops that were blown away, and large farm pieces of equipment moved across the fields. And so it must have been, because I would always ask my grandmother, because I've always been a weather fanatic about certain storms and stuff. And they used to tell all kinds of stories about all the damage that happened to that and how long it lasted. So that was a good question, John.
So Charles, real quickly, if you're talking about chickens and hurricanes, that must mean the weather was foul.
Correct. That was a good one. But yeah, my grandma would always, because she was born in like 1896, and this was back in the 70s, and I'd always ask her, exactly what happened during Hazel. And she'd say, this, that, and the other. Animals went to roost early, and I guess it came through during the daytime, apparently, because the cows came in and this, that, and the other, and they lost, several of the farm animals due to the storm. So, but I had a place in Kill Devil Hills, and the scariest one I went through, I believe it was called Diana, and I was working for PTF, and I think it was 1984. And they came by and told us, my friend and I were down there, and that was when you had to use a payphone or a regular phone to call PTF and call it a report. But they told us, they came by the beach house and said, you got to give us a next of kin, because you're the only people left down here and you need to leave. And we didn't do that until about 3 hours later. And when we finally left and crossed that Wright Memorial Bridge, there was water coming up over the pylons of the bridge. And I realized then that riding out a hurricane was probably not one of the smarter things that I had chosen to do. And I was glad to get off that island.
And Charles, that could have been worse, because that was a Cat 4 that was aimed right at our coast, and it got about 50 miles offshore and just decided to stop. And when it finally made landfall, if I'm remembering correctly, it was a 2, which is nothing to sneeze at, but it could have been a lot worse than it ended up being.
Agreed. And another one that I was going to mention was Felix, and I believe this was 94 or 95, and it was going to come into Hatteras, and it got close, and then went back out to sea. It went south, went back down towards Florida, and I don't think it made a landfall down that way, but it came back up again, and we were all evacuated, except for 3 or 4 of us stayed at my neighbor's and played cards and ran the generator. And it never did anything except generate some really intense surf. But I'll tell you, watching that surf with a pair of binoculars way out and seeing some of the powerful waves and how big they were, probably 14, 15 footers out there, I decided that was going to be my last one. And I think other than that, I went through Bertha with my mother down there, and even that, our house was pretty rocking for 5 or 6 hours in that one. But there's been a lot. People don't realize how many storms have come through just in my lifetime, and I'm 61, and there's been a lot of storms that have hit North Carolina. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about some of the worst ones, or some of the ones that could have been worse, or some of the history of hurricanes in North Carolina.
Yeah, I just know that period in the mid and late 90s, we were ground zero for just about everything back then. We had Bertha and Fran in 96, and Bonnie in 98, and Dennis and Floyd in 99. That was just an amazing period. And it always seemed like Topsail Beach got the worst of it with this whole storm, you know. But the humble admission I have about Bertha, and I remember, you know, management always used to get upset. They said I fell on my sword too much. But with Bertha, the night before it made landfall, it looked pathetic on the satellite imagery. And I remember thinking to myself that this may be downgraded by the time I get up in the morning. And I got up the next morning, and it was not only a Cat 1, but a Cat 2. And so that took an amazing turnaround in a very, very short period of time. And then, of course, Fran, the thing that everybody remembers about that is at 11 o'clock that night when the new advisory from the Hurricane Center came out, it had taken a slight eastward jaunt. And so they modified the forecast track and took it up across Rocky Mount as opposed to Raleigh. And it turns out it was just a wobble. And right after that advisory was issued, it resumed its earlier path. And as we all know, the center went right up over Raleigh. And I remember one of the big things I learned about that storm was from a professor in the Department of Forestry at NC State. And he told me that the type of soil that we have, when it gets saturated, takes on the consistency of a pancake batter. So he said, if you have tree roots sitting in pancake batter with even 50 or 60 mile an hour winds blowing on them all night long, the entire root ball is going to come up. And that's the thing I remember about Fran was you didn't see trees so much snapped off, but you saw root balls all over the place with that particular storm. So it really made me think about the fact that if you have a wet summer or a wet period leading up to a tropical cyclone, then that can really make things a lot worse from the standpoint of trees coming down, more so than it would be without that.
And I remember a PTF sent me to Wilmington to do Fran, and I got 3/4 of the way there, and they called me on the phone and said, it's coming to Raleigh. And I turned around and got to Newton Grove, and 40 was flooded across both sides of the road. And I had to go up a ramp and go all through the country. And back then there was no GPS. So it was maps and the night lights and a flashlight trying to figure out how to get out of all that. But that was a heck of a storm. I got home, went to bed, and I didn't think much about it. Got up the next morning and went to go up to Quail Corners and couldn't even get up Millbrook Road.
Right.
Power lines going off everywhere. It's like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And that was a scary storm. Floyd, of course, more rain. I went down to Rocky Mount to some land we had and couldn't get back out of there. Putzed around for a couple hours riding the ATV and got ready to leave. And a little creek had gone from just about a foot of water across the road to 4 feet across. So it took me back up towards Warrenton and a bunch of other roads to get back into Raleigh. And that was a surprising storm to me as to how fast that water rose in eastern North Carolina. Back to you, Greg.
But you know, with Fran, just one quick note, since everybody's power was out, we lived in a cul-de-sac back then. And so everybody had their gas grill out cooking dinner every night because nobody had any power. And the kids were having a ball because there was debris all over the place. And so they're jumping in and out of that. But I had a neighbor back then, and he made a great comment. He said, you know, we need to call the power company and have them shut off the power once a month so we can all get reacquainted. It's true.
Yeah, now that would be especially true nowadays because of social media and all that, because back then there was none of that. And same with the big ice storm of 2003. I remember going to Home Depot and getting a generator, and the neighbors were like, you're crazy. It's not going to do anything. And I was like, well, that's not what they're saying. And that was back when you were at RAL. And I said, you know, they're really saying this could turn out to be a big storm. And the next day, no one in the whole block had power, and I had all the outdoor lights on. I had DSL internet, so I had a computer that worked, and everybody was coming to my house because we had power. But
and you know, I had a neighbor a couple of doors down or houses down from us, and he was one of the few people that had a generator during that ice storm. And I'll never forget, he made this comment. He said, you know, I thought I was going to use the generator to turn on the Christmas lights, but I thought that might have been a bit gauche.
Well, since we brought that up, I would like to know, I've got a buddy that's all into snow removal. He's bought all this equipment. Well, over the last 3 or 4 years, he hasn't really used it.
No.
So I would like your opinion on why we're seeing less wintry precipitation and milder winters, and what you think we might see for this upcoming winter.
Well, if we're headed back into La Nina, they typically are not, you know, well, at least the statistics overall show that it's not a great setup, you know, for the Southeast. But the thing I will tell you, and I actually did some research before last winter, because I don't know if you remember this or not, but there were a lot of people, especially on television, that were saying, oh, we've got an El Nino coming, so we're definitely going to have above normal snowfall this winter. And so I actually went back and I looked at the percentage of years that we have above normal snowfall no matter what's going on, and then the percentage of years that we had above normal snowfall with El Ninos and La Ninas. Well, it turns out that the El Nino years only increased our probability of an above normal snowfall by 9%.
Wow, that's not very much.
Okay. No. And so, you know, I just remember cutting a video last November saying, don't necessarily hang your hat on this, because it isn't, you know, a 1-to-1 correlation. And boy, it sure as heck was not. And I think the 20-inch snow that we had in 2000 was in a La Nina year. So, you know, it just sort of kills all these assumed correlations that are foolproof, because almost no correlation is ever foolproof. There's always exceptions to it.
All right, good answer. I'm going to see if we've got any more check-ins, because I'm doing the Facebook and I'm getting all those, but I want to see if there's anybody else on the radio, which there probably is, that might want to get in on the net and ask a question. All right, well, I'm not hearing anybody on that end. I've got a lot of Facebook check-ins. Anybody that wants to ask a question on Facebook Messenger, please hit me up and we'll ask Greg, and we'll let this go another few minutes. And the other thing I wanted to ask is, with this current storm, do you project I mean, I've seen rain totals in Raleigh. They're calling for 2 to 4, and some people 6 to 8, some people up to 12. What's your take on that? And then after that, maybe we talk a little bit about how people could get on the Patreon.
Okay. Yeah, I would, here in the triangle, I would probably lean toward, you know, the amounts being under 10. You know, but, you know, even if we were to get 5 to 8, that's
a lot.
Nothing to sneeze at, you know. And then as you head south and east, you know, down toward Wilmington, they could be looking at, you know, easily 15 inches of rain, at least in spots down there. And again, you know, this thing is moving at 3 miles an hour right now. I mean, it's just crawling along. And obviously the problem with that is when you have a moist system dumping a lot of rain and it's moving that slow, you can pile up a lot in a relatively short amount of time. So that's my best estimate right now. But you know, it all depends in the end on exactly how it tracks. And we were talking earlier about, you know, which side of the storm you're on, that a lot of times the heavier rains can be on the east side in addition to the strongest winds. So it'll be interesting to see exactly where this thing tracks.
All right, hang on just a second. Give my hand a rest from this microphone. All right, because we're getting near 8, so I'm going to have you it's just me and you talking right this second. Tell us a little bit more about the Patreon and kind of how that. And Will's got hang on, Will, just a second. and how people can get involved with the Patreon and stuff. But let me let Will ask this second question before we get to that. Will, you're up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Greg, I was wondering, you were mentioning the slow moving, Debbie being slow moving, and I was just wondering, we see hurricanes that come in, stall a bit, meander a bit, and they talk about not having the steering winds. Very often we see hurricanes come, approach the coast, and then get pushed back out to the northeast. But Hurricane Florence, I recall, I think 2018, it came in, went west, then went north, and stayed over us a long time, dumped a lot of rain. Where are these steering winds now? Why aren't they present now? And are these like high level winds, upper atmosphere, or down low?
It's actually what these folks at the Hurricane Center look at is like a mean wind over a deep layer, and yes, they are definitely off the ground, but it can be, anywhere from like maybe 8,000 or 10,000 feet up to, 15,000 or 18,000 feet. You sort of take a layer averaged wind through that layer, and that's what you use. But there can always be wobbles, as we saw with Fran. A hurricane or a tropical storm is like a spinning top. And so there will be these little gyrations that, take place from time to time. But the reasoning behind this expected turn to the north and northwest, is that there is a ridge in the upper atmosphere, high pressure, that's building out over the western Atlantic. And as that strengthens, then that's going to increase the southerly flow on the west side of that high and start to suck Debbie, up along with that flow. And these can be really, really subtle changes. The upper level winds are generated by temperature contrast from one area to another. So in the wintertime, if you think about it, it's brutally cold a lot of times up along the U.S.-Canadian border, but down in South Florida and South Texas, it's not all that cold. And so you have a lot of contrast, a lot of upper level winds, and, things move along. But in the summertime, it can be just as hot in Minnesota as it is in Texas. And so the temperature contrast goes to pot, and by definition, the upper level winds go to pot as well. And so the steering currents sometimes become very, very weak and ill-defined. And that's what we find ourselves in right now. But it looks like those steering currents over the next couple of days will become better defined, and eventually this thing will be able to accelerate off to the north and get out of our hair by the weekend.
All right, Will, any thoughts or comments, and did that answer your question?
That answers it, Charles. I appreciate it. Appreciate it, Greg.
Take care.
All right, I got one other question, and that is some of the guys on the net today in Arkansas and Oklahoma were talking about 100-degree heat. Is that something that we've got to look forward to after this system clears out of here for the next couple of weeks?
It doesn't look like it for the next 7 days, although I could see one of the 2 days this weekend and probably Saturday having the best shot at getting to 90. But right now, it does not look like we're, at least for the next 7 days, have anything to worry about with regard to the, upper 90s and low 100s that we had. And we could do a whole nother show on the RDU temperature sensor.
Yeah.
That was, and if you live in a highly urban area, then it's possible that 106 wasn't that far off from what you would have experienced. But for the vast majority of us, that maybe live in suburban areas and where there's, some grass and that kind of stuff, that just was not realistic at all. It just wasn't representative of where people lived. And so that's why I made such a fuss about it.
Well, I was working outside that day, and we were up in Durham, northern Durham on 501. And I remember getting in the truck and hearing it on the radio, seeing it on the dashboard. And I thought, I'm still working and I'm not really feeling that it's that bad. So I was thinking to myself, I can't ever remember 106 degrees in my 60 and 61 years of life. And I thought it doesn't really feel that bad. And so I was thinking more like 100 and 101 or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because even the guy I was working with, he said, it just doesn't feel all that, like dreadfully hot. Maybe the humidity was a little lower that day, or maybe there was a breeze or whatnot. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the Patreon. I think there's 2 different tiers you've got. Explain that, and how folks get involved and all that. Because I know, but I want everybody else to know about it.
Okay. Well, the way this all started was both of my kids, who are now 29 and 33, still play hockey, and so I was up in Raleigh. One of them was playing a hockey game, and we were having dinner beforehand, and one of my 2 sons said, Greg, you still got a little bit of a following. Have you ever heard about Patreon? I said, never heard of it. And so it is a platform where you can charge a subscription fee for whatever you're trying to sell. And so I thought, well, I still love the weather and still love, producing videos about it. And so I started on August 1st of 2022, I guess it was. And it's $3 a month for the basic level, which is, the daily weather forecast and a lot of extra details Monday through Friday. And then for an additional $2 a month, I do a bonus video Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, which is a very deep dive into the science. And if you're really a nerd and maybe you don't mind a little bit of math every now and then, that would be your preferred level. But if it's not, and you're just more interested in the forecast, maybe a few extra tidbits, then the $3 level would make way more sense. Again, I don't have any time constraints, and the one thing I do is that I always give the forecast first. So if you're either don't have time or you're just not interested in anything more than if it's going to rain tomorrow or not, then I get that out of the way. And then if you want to hang around for the rest of it, you can. But if you don't have time or you're not interested, you don't have to. That was a common ploy in the television industry. I don't know how many people knew this, but for ratings, television ratings, they would split the hour up into 4 15-minute segments. And you would never see weather before 15 after the hour because they wanted you to watch that second 15-minute segment.
Yes, before you got to the weather. Yep.
And so that is not something that, that I have to worry about. I just basically, talk about what I think interests me and hopefully interests you. And if it takes 6 minutes one day, that's fine. Every once in a while, it might take 8 or 10. But again, you don't have to sit through the whole thing if you don't want to, because the forecast is always there right at the top. And if you just go to Patreon, patreon.com/fishweather, all one word, FISH, and then weather, then you can sign up there. And you know what? If you don't like it after a month, it's very easy to cancel. Not that I would encourage that, but, I certainly don't want to hold anybody hostage, if you're not getting anything out of it. So, for $3, you can try it. And if it doesn't work out or you don't like it or just don't feel like you're using it, then it's easy to get out.
I will say that's what I like about it, because sometimes you'll come on and I'll get the notification and I'll be driving and I'll not be able to listen to the whole thing, and I'll listen to just the forecast so I know what's coming in the next couple of hours or that day. And then when I get home or somewhere where I can sit down, I'll bring it back up and listen to the whole thing. And, I can plug it into the TV or I can plug it into the screen on the car and make it big and watch it. So it's flexible too. And I like that. And, I can watch it on the MacBook. I can watch it on the phone. Doesn't matter. There's several different methods you can use to watch it.
Right.
Well, let me see if there's anybody else on the radio here. Last and final call. Anybody else that wants to check in and ask Greg a question? All right, well, I'm going to let him give some final thoughts and comments, and then we're going to close it up, because I know the Raleigh amateur radio folks are doing their net at 8, and a lot of these folks go over there. So we got 8 minutes.
Okay.
Greg, I'll turn it back to you. There's some final thoughts and comments, and we'll do this again in a few months.
Sure, that sounds good to me. I'm going to throw something out there, and I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I just wanted to sort of throw the idea out. when I left Raleigh in 2020, I moved down to West Palm Beach, Florida for a while, and quickly discovered that I don't like an area that doesn't have seasons, and I didn't like being 11 hours away from virtually everybody that I loved and cared about. And so Myrtle Beach seemed like it was a good compromise, that I had always wanted to live near the coast, but, you know, I wasn't that far from Raleigh and, you know, family and friends and so forth. And I've done a lot of thinking over the last few years. You can't spend 39 years someplace and not develop a lot of attachments there. And so it's been on my radar for a year now to try to sell my place here and move back to Raleigh. But because of rising prices and rising interest rates and all that sort of stuff, it's been a difficult sell. So if any of you know of somebody out there that is looking for either an investment property or you know, just a place to live as your main home, as this is for me, then by all means let me know. And it's not, I mean, it's beautiful down here, don't get me wrong, and I'm one of these people that can stare at the ocean all day long and never get tired of it, but there's a lot of people I miss being able to see on a regular basis. And so that's the eventual goal for me, to get back to the Triangle, but I can't do it until until this place sells. So just thought I'd bring that up. As far as the weather goes, the big thing we'll be watching is when Debbie decides to finally make that turn off toward the north and northwest, and how much strength it can regain while it's out over water. It just doesn't look like it's going to be able to get back to hurricane status, but the main issue with this thing is going to be flooding. And then, of course, there can always be isolated tornadoes with tropical systems once they approach land and come inland. And so that's something we'll be watching as well. The good news is things should start to improve later Friday and Friday night. And right now, the weekend doesn't look bad at all. And the humidity may actually go down a little bit.
Wow, that would be good.
Tuesday, you know, so if you'll pardon the pun, I guess we have to make the most of it.
Well, I have really enjoyed this, and I know everybody else has, and we've had a lot of watchers on the Facebook Live, and it lasted way longer than I thought, and it's been very interesting. And yeah, we've had a lot of people with a lot of really good questions. So, Greg, I want to say from Susan and I, when you come back to Raleigh, you got a dinner on us somewhere, so let's meet up. We'll go to Winston's or somewhere and have dinner here whenever you get back to Raleigh. And it's great news. If you can get back to Raleigh, that would be awesome, because we'd all love to be able to interact with you more on a local basis. And for those that don't know, sometimes Greg's back in, and sometimes we all get together at Panera or at Milton's Pizza when Martin has the networking group. So you do come back to Raleigh quite a bit. So that's been cool to be able to get together with you.
Absolutely.
All right, hang on just a second. I'm going to let you off, and I'm going to clear up the net here. Okay. And if you'll just hang on just a second, but I'm going to clear up on the radio. All right, so I'm going to close off the net. I'm going to talk to Greg a little bit on FaceTime afterwards, and I appreciate everybody's participation. We had 17 check-ins. One last thing, Susan, do you have any questions for Greg?
No, I just wanted to say hello.
She just wanted to say hello. She's in the background over here. So.
Hello back.
But yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I will let folks know. We can do something maybe right prior to the winter and talk about, you know, what may come on the winter, because this is easy to set up now with the MacBook. I want to thank Joe Bryan at Intrex for getting my MacBook set up and ready for me, and Martin KI4CFS for helping me with the getting the FaceTime, and we tried Zoom and all that, but Zoom gives you 30 minutes, and I remember the last time it cut us off after about 20. So then we had to make other arrangements. But anyway, I'm going to close the net for tonight. Remember, the net's recorded, and it's on this Facebook group, Infinity, for as long as I know. So if you want to go back and watch it later, and Martin's going to probably put it on YouTube for us and edit it. And I've got him actually on speaker. He's listening to me because he just called. So I'll close the PCRN VHF RagTunet for tonight. Thanks, everyone. And then I'm going to talk to Greg and Martin.